We're live.
This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Anise.
I'm Rami.
And I'm Maya.
And today, oh God, hang on. Who's going to edit this?
It's been so great having Gerald.
How weird is this? Because I haven't got my introduction.
When you edit, all of a sudden you find all your mistakes. You're just
yeah.
like, I hate them all.
Because I couldn't print off the thing because the dog was in here and the dog hates the printer and so I thought I'll do it online, and then of course I forgot to admit. Right, okay. Gerald, cut out this bit. As always, if you haven't read the story, pause the podcast, read the story, and then return. For today's story, we drop into the colourful world of Kew Gardens by Virginia Woolf. The author writes about some of the flora and fauna and also some of the characters enjoying a sunny day in Kew Gardens, London, in the early part of last century. The end.
So Gerald, how'd you feel?
Yeah. Well, it was a nice little portrait of people and flowers and snails. It didn't really go anywhere.
Okay, so we discover the issue that I knew Gerald was going to have with the story the minute he picked it, because I actually love Virginia Woolf with a passion. I knew the story was not going to have enough plot for you. I just knew it. This is like the original like slice of life type story. It's like if you climbed inside a Monet painting, this is what would come out.
It's funny. I've been doing some audio stuff and we had another one of these recently that was interesting and entertaining and nicely written and everything, but didn't go anywhere. So I'll just repeat that.
Yeah, we'll talk about this later. Yeah. Rami, how did you feel about Kew Gardens?
Yeah, I think the summary kind of reflected, I imagine, how most of us, if not all of us, feel, is that there wasn't really much happening in the story. It's kind of descriptive.
I'm so disappointed.
Nice.
Well, I liked it. I hear all of these criticisms and agree, but also I got enough out of it to like have stuff to discuss, and because it was so short, I'm cool with the no plot because there was enough other stuff for me to chew on. So I guess I'll be a defender on this show.
See, I love this story with a passion, and I am coming around to the idea that story isn't about plot. Story is about a lot of different things, and for me, what makes us a story isn't plot. There was plenty of other stuff there.
Yeah, I think this is what we said on the other podcast recently, that and we sort of analysed what we thought story should be and what makes a story, and yeah, it doesn't make it for me. But anyway, talk away.
Gerald, as you were reading it, did you get any emotions or impressions or anything that came up for you as you were reading it? Like, take away the fact that there's no plot. Just, you're reading the story. How did you feel as you read it?
I think the problem is with these type of pieces of fiction, that I hesitate to call a story, is that I'm trying to...
I heard that fiction.
I'm spending all my time trying to work out where the story is and not enjoying it for what it is. So I read it and then I reread it and I reread it and thinking, where's the story? And then it's just, and then I get sort of frustrated and just think, yeah, it's all right and it's nice and I get the pictures and I get the I can see what she's saying and I can see what she's doing, but yeah, there's no. I want it to go somewhere.
I have the cure for you.
Which is?
I would say that for me, I had the same issue for a really long time. Like if you listen to our episodes from 2 years ago, you know, we ran into these slice of life stories and I would be right there with you going, that's not a story. It's not a story. But I think over the past year, I've been reading some stuff that's kind of pushing the edge of what story is. and the idea that plot isn't the end all be all of story, and reading back to back to back a ton of stories that don't have a lot of plot kind of cured me of that constant searching for the plot as I read something, which allowed me to step back and just experience it for what it was.
Also, so one of the biggest comment that I have is that it's the whole thing. It's like if somebody did a watercolor painting in words, and there's a reference to watercolor paintings in this story. And if you see it that way, it's almost like she's doing something different with this craft. It's like as I'm reading the story, I see Virginia Woolf sitting in Kew Gardens next to this oval circle of flowers, observing everything around her and painting it as if it were a watercolor, but through words. And it's, is it the last paragraph? I think it's the very last paragraph. There's a line that really brings that home, because she's constantly referencing colors, but she's also referencing colors as stains and the way they bleed into each other, and people have indefinite shapes. So there's a line that's yellow and black, pink and snow white, shows of all these colors, men, women, and children were spotted for a second upon the horizon, and then seeing the breath of yellow that lay upon the grass, they wavered as a shade beneath the trees, dissolving like drops of water in the yellow and green atmosphere, staining it faintly with red and blue. Everything's got that blurry watercolor feel to it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really beautiful. So it just sort of, for me, became this sort of like meditative, very zen sort of piece.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And also, I find it interesting how you describe like seeing her sitting in a park watching this. And for me, like even in the beginning, there's references to water lilies, and I kind of saw her in a museum looking at a Monet painting and wondering about the people in the painting kind of situation. Similar to you, it's like a painting rather than a story. And that to me is really pushing the art towards its edges of what fiction is in a way that I thought was really interesting and fascinating. One of the things, the reason why I love Virginia Woolf is I love her use of language. Always have. And I remember the first time I read Orlando, I was in love with the book, even though I had no idea what was happening because the language was so beautiful. I had to read it 3 times before I actually understood what was happening. And so, you know, I definitely think that the use of language and in like an artistic, experimental, painterly way is something that, you know, is beautiful about this story.
Rami looks like he's going to say something.
Yeah, Rami looks like he's going to tear into me.
It just did a little,
I think because both of you had commented, I think it's a pretty appropriate analogy or comparison by saying that it's like a painting with words, right? But in that case, is it a story or just
it is literary
like
fiction,
a journal
dude.
entry? Is it like a journal entry or someone just describing the day? You know, is it?
You know, it's funny you say that, because at the very beginning, just after a few paragraphs, like after the very first one, my very first comment is, this story reminds me of when I took a drawing class in college, and I just drew branches over and over and over, and then a bunch of rocks over and over and over and over, and it was just about observation. And then you would like stare at like something that you think is one color, but actually it's 1,000 colors, and you'd have to write down all the colors you saw, right? And it reminded me of that. I'm like, what she's doing right here with words is that drawing class exercise I had to do. And then you're like, oh, it's like a journal entry. And it was basically like, here I am in my little sketchbook, like doing the same branch 1,000 times. So it did sort of have that feeling to it, but I still liked it. I hear what you're saying. Is it a story? I mean, I can be like, not in the conventional sense that we're looking for, but for what we're exploring here as we're talking about text and language and what people do with it, it's still interesting enough that I think it's worthy of discussion and to be read and analyzed in the way that it does that very well.
One of the things that strikes me about Rami's comment is, remember when we first started this podcast, you know, we wanted to focus on literary fiction. We were constantly trying to figure out what literary fiction is. You know, what is literary fiction versus genre fiction? What is a plot? Is it change of characters? Like, what is it that makes literary fiction literary fiction? And through that time, we've read a lot of literary fiction that is very plot heavy, that is very, you know, it's easier to take on the top level, and it also has tons of layers. And I think what's happening the last few stories, with the exception of Monkey's Paw, because that definitely very strict, like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. But I think recently we've been getting into more experimental stuff that isn't so easy to categorize. And I think that's good because it shows growth as far as us as a podcast. Like if we had read this, the first couple months of the show, I think all of us would have had a very different take on the story. And I can really see the growth in us as readers after almost, 2.5 years of reading short stories, that we're able to take a story that doesn't have plot and still be able to pick out the interesting bits and understand why it's considered a story. So the question is, does it matter that it's not a conventional story? To me, it doesn't, because to me, that is part of what makes it literary fiction. It's pushing those boundaries.
Yeah, I can see that, and I can understand that, and I can understand that it is, if we call it a piece of literary fiction rather than a story, then it sort of makes sense to me. And I was just thinking while people were talking, then if the author would have maybe stuck with one pair of characters, and we'd have seen some progression of those characters, and you can have all the sort of garden stuff and whatnot, and the flowers and the beautiful writing. You can have all that, but then you have characters to convey the story, and you then see something move on, and yeah, it is. I accept the point that it is like an artist sitting on the grass, just sketching. Except there is movement and there is progression in time, so it's a bit more than that. But it's.
I have a question, okay? Because I think I might have gotten the nail on. I think I might have figured out something. To each of you, I asked this question: who is the main character of the story?
I was just going to say, I'm pushing back on you, Gerald. I mean, I guess you could technically say it's the person writing it, but honestly, it's the snail, because the snail has had the biggest character arc of this whole story.
That's true.
Because that snail, okay, he had an adventure. He had a leaf to get over or under or around, all right? Listen, his antenna, he was just constantly figuring out life amongst the massive stalks of the flowers. So if you want a character arc, that's Snail's story, okay?
Yeah.
But also,
I love you.
Yeah. But I'd say the main character is the narrator, who never says I. That's what I'm saying. When I'm seeing this story,
it's not. It's what? It's an omnipotent. I don't think it is the narrator. I don't think the narrator. It's an omniscient narrator. It's God, essentially.
But I don't even see it as God. I just see Virginia Woolf. I'm like, okay, cool. Virginia Woolf's in a garden right now as she's writing this. Like, that's all I see. It's very much the experience of a person in Kew Gardens, how they're experiencing it, and also the snail.
Grammy, who's the main character of the story?
Yeah, I agree. The narrator, I guess.
You think the narrator? Who's the narrator?
Either Virginia Woolf herself or whoever she's trying to
You gotta
make.
pick. Who do you think the narrator is? As you're reading the story, who do you think that main character is?
Some fiction. I always tend to think that it's some fictional narrator and not the actual author speaking in her voice. Like
The experience.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Gerald, who do you think the main character is?
Yeah, in terms of main character, I agree with Anais. It's the snail, and there is some like she said, there he goes on a real adventure and what to do about this leaf that's in its way and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, I can see that, and there's a whole load of subsidiary characters and.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Are you gonna say it's the garden, Maya?
Because I actually was wavering on this as I was reading it. I was like, when it came, I guess the third act, when he's looking up and seeing the ceiling and figuring out this area where he's in, I was like, oh, the snail is the main character. And then I thought about it, and I actually think Kew Gardens is the main character of this story. And I think by having either Kew Gardens the main character, looking at it through that lens, or looking at it through the lens of the snail, you do get much more of a sense of story, because suddenly the idea of focusing in on one couple is a completely different story, because that's not the story that's being told. This is the story of being in one spot, in one place, and seeing everything that's passing by, you know, and it's a different type of story to me. And I think it's really interesting that Annie said the snail, because like I totally was like, is it Kew Gardens? Is it the snail? Is it Kew Gardens? Is it the snail? Because the snail had a character arc.
Remember when the angular green insect jumped in front of him? I was like, it's gonna go down. Right?
He had an inciting incident. Mm-hmm. He had progressive complications.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He overcame them.
Yeah.
He overcame them.
You know, and the other thing I liked about the snail is she kept cutting. It was people, snail, people, snail. And it's like, what's the snail doing? The snail is dealing with what's right in front of it. What are the people doing? They're obsessed with either the past, loss, social pecking order, appearances, gossip. Like the people are just like, and the snail's just here, you know, just doing what he's got to do. And then she would reference how the people would sometimes get distracted by the flowers, but for the most part, we're completely ignoring them, right? And there was, and while the snail's just dealing with the garden at all times.
Did you catch the bit of reflection, the bookends of the young couple at the end and the old couple in the beginning? The older couple with the kids, you know, and it's like they'd had like that passionate first love and then they settled. And then you get this younger couple that are going to go have tea and they're not really present for each other, but you can tell they're together. And to me, that was also really interesting use of reflection.
And also the young couple was very anxious about, so I got the sense that the guy is from a lower class, social class than the girl. So that was kind of interesting, like his self-consciousness. Again, the snail didn't have any of this. His self-consciousness that people are staring at him and wanting to get the tea.
See, the story even has a moral. It has something for everybody, Remy. You just got to be the snail.
Yeah. Isn't it saying something when you're trying to make an argument that the main character is a snail?
Or a garden?
We're reading literary fiction. You got to take off that hat that's waiting for Netflix. We're past that at this point.
No, you know,
we snuck you in there with some easy fiction, but now.
Yeah,
you know, I want to push back a little on the idea that it's necessarily the garden, because I get what you're saying, and that happens in other stories where like it's the location, but normally the location itself is going through some transformation or witnessing some sort of big change for people. Where here, I still feel like it's just a watercolor painting, because there's no big commentary on like what is Kew Gardens? How is Kew Gardens? I don't know, like affecting.
No, it's a commentary on humanity and how disconnected we are.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, to me, it's totally a commentary on how disconnected we are from our surroundings and from each other. I think Virginia Woolf does that really well. But like with all of her stuff, as much as I love her, she's work. This is not an author that is going to spoon food you anything. You have to figure out what the story means. And I love her enough that I'm willing to do that. Like, this is where we get into trusting the author. It's like, if this was not an author that I knew I could trust, I might have read through it much faster and not gotten as much out of it, because I may not have given them the time to let it develop within me.
Yeah,
so it's also a lesson to slow down.
Yeah, I think that applies to me a little bit. I've not read Virginia Woolf before, and so I didn't know what to expect, and I shouldn't know what to expect. I shouldn't need to understand without being able to appraise the piece of work. So there's that. But I was very disconnected from it. I can see the points you're making. I don't accept that the garden's the character. That's too left field. But
you know what you say about not needing to understand the author to get the story. You know, part of me is like, yes, I want to jump on that train, right, with Gerald. But then the other part of me remembers reading 32 Raymond Carver stories. I think I got to story number 29 before I understood what was so great about Raymond Carver. And I remember reading my first Virginia Woolf story and having to read it out loud because I couldn't understand the language. And I just got done reading Diane Williams, had no clue what was happening for the first 40 some odd stories. And I'm still not entirely sure what was happening. But through the experience of reading authors that are more difficult for me, I've learned to slow down and check my assumptions. And those are lessons that I'm really thankful for having. So, you know, I want to be like, we should be able to read any author, but some authors are just work.
Also, speaking of authors, so this story was very distinctly Virginia Woolf in the writing, the descriptions, everything, the focus, and also the Eleanor.
Actually found it easier to read than some of her other stuff.
Yeah, but Eleanor, who references when a woman kissed the back of her neck when she was a child, and that's when the kiss beneath all kisses. And I was just like, that's so Virginia Woolf too. She always has like the lesbian, like the
undercurrent.
Yeah, the undercurrent to everything. And I was just like, wow, like it was just, you know, all the power to her, and there's a lot of literature on that. But it's just like very interesting. This Kew Gardens story, there it is.
Honestly, I've never read a Virginia Woolf short story, and I've had people come up to me and be like, what should I read? I want to read Virginia Woolf. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, because some of her stuff is like still way over my head. But I did, while this is very quintessentially Virginia Woolf, I did find it easier reading. And I think for someone that wants to start out reading Virginia Woolf, I would put Kew Gardens up there. It's like a great place to start out because it's short. It's a very good example of her language, but it's like more accessible than Orlando. It's not as boring as Lighthouse, like, you know. So I think it's a good representation in that respect.
She has more boring stories than this?
Oh, yeah. Whole books.
Wow. I must read that.
They're amazing. They're absolutely amazing, but I'm not going to pretend like there's anything going on. Like, which book is it that it's like the entire book is a party in someone's house? Orlando has an amazing plot, but you know, yeah, you know, I mean, Virginia Woolf is Virginia Woolf. Orlando has an amazing plot, but you got to get through the language to even get it.
Galloway, what are you thinking of? The famous.
Yeah, I think that's the one that was a party. Yeah, I got like halfway through it. I still haven't read it all the way. I'm going to, though. It's on my list.
Yeah. Well, running into that thing.
Do you have anything else you want to say about this story, Anise?
No, that's the thing. I just ran through all my notes. That's what I was about to say.
Rami, was there anything else you wanted to talk about with the story? I mean, as you were reading it, you mentioned that not much happens and that it was boring. Did you feel like you got anything out of the story? Aside from a sore butt? From sitting too long?
I mean, it wasn't really sitting that long and didn't take that long to read, but I think maybe just how to describe things poetically. Some ideas for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes I've helped other writers when they become stuck or blocked or whatever, and they said they haven't written for days, and what I tell them to do is to hold out their arms out full length and do a little sort of square with their fingers and describe everything they see in that square, like 100 characters, 200 words, 200 words, 200 words. Describe everything in detail, and I felt that was what she was doing here. That incredible detail, really interesting description of the surroundings, and I think I take your point. I don't know who made it, where there's a disconnect between the human characters and the environment, and they're just basically ignoring what's around them, and I thought that was quite interesting. So that's brought something to me that I didn't have before. So that, and of course the snail, yeah, really into his environment.
One thing I would like to mention for our listeners, because I know Virginia Woolf can be very heavy with language, and sometimes you get so caught up in trying to decipher what a sentence says that you don't actually hear the sentence. But her stuff really works well in audio. And LibriVox did a recording of this story. It's available for free. You can just Google Kew Gardens Virginia Woolf audio, or we'll put a link in the show notes. I highly recommend listening to the audio version of this short story because it allows you to actually really understand the beauty of her language, because much like poetry, her stuff reads better aloud, I think. Are we ready to rate this thing?
I am.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So am I. I'm gonna get my 6 out of the way next.
Whoa.
What?
Yes, to me it's perfect. I love the story. It's like perfect language. You guys know I get hung up on poetics. You know it. You knew this was coming. This should not be a surprise.
There's a bit of a grade inflation on this show, which is why I'm coming in at a 4.5.
Whoa.
Great inflation.
Yeah, there is. There has been a great inflation where like everything's 5 or 6, 5 or 6. It's 6 if you loved it, 5 if you didn't. So
hey, I often give 4s, 3s. Like it's how many 6s have I given? I think I've given fewer 6s than everybody else. I don't want to hear nothing.
If a listener would like to do a tally. Yeah. So anyway, I'm not doing it, but
no.
So I'm giving it a 4.5 because I did get a lot out of it. I think it's a meditative piece. I like the watercolor painting feeling of it. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm hearing Rami over there. And Gerald. I would like more plot. So yeah.
Yay for plot. Yeah, I'm going up half a point. I'm now going for a 4. I was a 3.5, but you've helped me see a bit more of the story and a bit more.
I've helped you see the light.
It's less dark rather than light. Let's not go too bad.
I'm going to try to counterbalance these ratings by giving it a 2.
Whoa. Gosh.
Yeah, I have a rule. From now on, if you're going to give something below a 3, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But you got to talk more in the episode to justify that.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No, he doesn't.
This is your opening to explain yourself, Remy.
I was going to say a 3 just to say like, okay, it's an average story, whatever, but it all comes back to would I recommend this to someone? And for me, the answer is no.
There we go.
We are so opposite because I would totally recommend it. Not only would I recommend reading it more than once because every time I read it, I got something else out of it.
Yeah.
Me and Remy are like total opposites right now. I'm just like,
oh,
it's okay, Virginia Woolf. It's okay.
I'm surprised because she's such a well-known author. I guess she's better with her, but you're saying the books are just as kind of slow?
No, well, slow, but
it's like the epitome of literary fiction to me. Like it's experimental. The language is really dense and beautiful, and you gotta dig in. It's not just like here's the story. None of her stuff is like that. So what are we submitting for next week?
So I'm submitting the same thing I did last week, which is Exquisite Corpse. It's a 2014 New York Times Magazine parlor game where they had 15 renowned authors contribute to the same story.
3.
I am not submitting the same story as last week because I can't remember what it was and I really wanted to. So I am actually, everybody knows I haven't liked any of the Hemingway stories we've tried, but I'm grasping. I know there's one out there I'm going to like. So I am submitting Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway.
Woo.
And the story I'm submitting is After the Race by James Joyce.
Ooh. Remy, fist bump.
Yes. Okay. So today's quiz is not about snails. I'm pleased to know.
Oh, really?
About Kew Gardens.
Yeah.
I was totally ready for Snail Quiz.
Yeah, I'm sure you were.
Snails are kind of interesting.
I'll take your word for that. So today's quiz is and it's multiple choice, 3 choices, but you all get to have a go, and it doesn't matter if more than one person chooses the same thing. So I'll tot it up on my handy little pad here. So it's a quiz all about plants and trees and garden type things. So that's quite exciting. Yeah, I can tell
You're really selling it, Gerald.
Yeah, I know.
You're Grammy. Gerald, I love you.
It's all right. Okay, question 1, and we'll take it in turn. So, okay, Anise first, then Maya, then Rami.
Okay.
Okay, and the first question is: the world's largest individual flower is, of course, Rafflesia arnoldi, growing in the forests. Yeah, everyone knows this. See, I didn't ask you that, did I? So that's pretty good. Growing in the forests of Indonesia. How big is the single flower? So here's the choices: 3 feet 7, 4 feet 11, or 5 feet 2. So Anise, 3, 7, 4, 11, 5, 2.
5, 2.
Okay. Maya?
4'11".
4'11". And Rami?
I'll take the third option.
3 foot 7.
Sure.
Okay, the answer is 4 feet 11. And I'm not fixing this so we read the Ernest Hemingway. I promise you. 4 feet 11 across. There you go. Okay, on to the next question, which is also exciting. The world's heaviest fruit was a pumpkin grown, as we all know, by Benny Meyer. How heavy was it? Was it 1,487 pounds, 1,956 pounds, or 2,323 pounds? Anise?
1,400 something.
Okay. Maya?
B. Was what, 19 something? Yeah.
And Rami?
23.
23. And Rami is, of course, correct. It is
What?
5,000.
I've seen pictures of this pumpkin. It's kind of crazy. It looks totally deformed.
Total bonkers, isn't it? Okay, let's change things down a bit. The smallest fruit in the world is... Oh, you see, Rami's enjoying this quiz. The smallest fruit in the world is Wolfia augusta. How long is the fruit? Is it, and you have to be a bit metric here, is it 0.1 millimeters, 0.3 millimeters, or 0.5 millimeters? Anise?
0.3.
0.3. Okay. Maya?
Okay, what were the choices again?
0.1, 0.3, 0.5 millimeters.
0.1.
0.1. And Rami?
0.5.
0.5. And it's even Stevens because Annie's got that. It's 0.3 millimeters, of course.
Oh, gosh.
Yes, awesome. The world's tallest tree is the coast redwood, which, as we know in Latin, is Sequoia sempervirens, growing in Redwood National Park, California. How tall is it? Is it 380 feet, 430 feet, or 460 feet high?
460.
460. Maya?
She took my answer.
You can use it.
You can do. You can have the same answer. Both
460.
460. Okay. And Rami?
460.
And you're wrong. Useless. 380 feet.
Lies. It's the tallest. Listen, this is Verica. It's always the
I've
biggest
seen
top.
this tree. It's huge. How's it only 300 and something? It's huge.
Yeah, that's pretty big.
I feel like he purposefully made it the smallest one because he's un-American.
Ooh. Ooh.
Well, you are British. That's the joke.
Okay. Well, this is taking an unseemly turn. This quiz, right? Since we've got 2 questions left. I'm gonna give you a tie break now.
Okay, Maya cut out, but
is she?
yeah, she's disappeared.
Okay.
She's probably so mad that it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't 460.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Climbing one right now.
It wasn't a quiz about snails. That's what she wanted.
She's climbing a tree and she's like, "How high am I now, Gerald?"
Yeah, this will show you. I'll wait till she's back.
Yeah, she says she's trying to get back in.
Okay.
I know you're rooting for her for the Hemingway, which I'm going to try to not take personally, but...
You can check the answers later if you so wish.
Hemingway was still alive, he would have been an exquisite corpse.
Oh, come on, Maya. There's a lot to delete in this one.
Oh yeah, I usually cut all this banter between, unless someone says something actually interesting.
Something actually funny.
I'm back.
Okay, so we 1 point each.
Did I miss a turn?
No, we waited for you.
No.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
So we're at 1 point each. So instead of asking 2 more questions, we're going to ask 1 question, but that is the tie-break question. So here you go. And it's about trees again. The oldest tree in the world is Great Basin bristlecone pine, Pinus longeva, of course, growing in Inyo County, also in California. Got a lot of big stuff in California.
We get all the old trees in California.
Yeah. How old is it? And you're going to have to guess here. How old is the oldest tree in the world? Anais.
It's in the thousands, right? 6,000 years old.
6,000. Okay. Maya.
5,000.
5,000. And Rami.
3,000.
3,000.
You know, it goes at least to BC.
I think it's higher than 6, to be honest. I just didn't want to sound insane.
I know it's super old.
Well, the answer is 5,067 years, which makes Maya the winner. I'm sorry. No fix.
Yeah,
That was a good quiz.
Yeah.
That was really good. I nailed that. That's kind of awesome. What was the exact number? 5,000 what?
5,067 years.
Wow. I don't think I've ever been that close before. Yeah. So next week we are reading Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway.
All right. But before you go, express your opinion on today's story in watercolor metaphors at literaryroadhouse.com. Comments about snails, dragonflies, and angular green insects go on Twitter to @LitRoadhouse. And if you, like Gerald and Tommy, wanted a story with more plot, join the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, a monthly show that discusses full fiction novels. And finally, we would like to take a breezy trip to Kew Gardens. Please help us finance our British adventure at patreon.com/Literary Roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the snails in your life. Until next time.